Hello everyone, my name is Shruti Sharma and in this year in the Civil Services examination I got AIR 1. Today I'm having a session regarding mainly answer writing as to how I approached answer writing in my general studies papers. I got a total of 494 marks in my general studies papers, and there were a few things that I tried to do before the examination in terms of preparing a strategy for it, preparing some content for it. So I'm going to try to share what I did during this time. As to how this session is going to be structured, firstly I'll talk about certain basic things that you can apply in all 4 papers, and then we're going to go subject wise, or sorry, paper wise. Now we come to GS 3. Now GS3 is a challenge because it has a lot of information and it has a lot of subjects as well. So what are the things that are covered here? There's economy, there's environment, there's science and tech, there's disaster management, there's internal security. राइट ठीक है, तो इसमें what all you can do, and remember in GS3, especially if you look at this year and the last couple of years, there are 2 types of questions that are asked. One are very specific questions which it is likely that either you know or you don't know. So say this time question on say WHO guidelines about a very specific thing, or say S400 missile system, a 10-mark question completely on the S400 missile system and its workings, or say the difference in GDP calculation pre and post 2014, or something about very specific questions basically that you know. And on the other hand, there are certain questions which are slightly open-ended. Say for example the ways in which nanotechnology can be used, or robotics or AI can be used, or say ways in which robotics can be used in agriculture, say something like that, right? Or if you're talking about urban flooding as a phenomena in disaster management, or you're talking about security questions which are say about terrorism, or what are the uneven threats, or something was that about asymmetric warfare, or something about terrorism, which are more or less same, right? So there are 2 categories of questions. One are very specific questions which come only a single year and they're very unlikely to be repeated in any of the coming years. And the other sort of questions are more open-ended, which are more theme-based, which are sort of mentioned in the syllabus, and will at least be, I think, at least half the questions, if not more or less, right? Based on the syllabus entirely. So make sure that at least those open-ended questions which are clearly mentioned in the syllabus, which are likely to be repeated more or less, say every alternate year or so, at least those you make really strong in GS3. And for me, those questions are usually from say disaster management, internal security. These 2 make sure that you are very strong with, you have very good content, so that in the question that everyone knows, your answer is much better than the person before and after you. So this was something that I personally did. I had good notes on disaster management, good notes on internal security with a lot of examples, good introductions and conclusions. Science and tech also, maybe not this time, but say make sure that you prepare notes on nanotech, you prepare notes on AI, on space, on robotics, on say biotech. Okay, this is a topic which is regularly repeated, biotechnology, nanotechnology. So make sure that you have good notes on them. With respect to disaster management and internal security, how you can sort of structure your answers. So say disaster management specifically, you can talk about apart from certain examples which have happened in the future, you can do that. And then in terms of solutions before a disaster, because then there are say 10 suggestions you can make as to what to do during landslides, or what to do during an earthquake, or what to do in urban floods, because urban floods is something that has come many times in the last few years. But in terms of how to structure that answer, you can divide it into say before disaster, during disaster, after disaster. You can use the Sendai framework divisions to also answer that. So try to use, and if for example, if there are 2 disaster based questions, make sure that you're not using the exact same structure and exact same solutions in terms of say build back better and all of that. in both answers. In one answer, you write the conclusion is being built back better according to the Sendai framework and ABC guidelines. Another one, you try to use another example or another committee's recommendation. Say, for example, if it's on landslides or if it's about Himalayan sort of anything, talk about Deepak Chopra committee and how development needs to be in a certain way, or the Madhav Gadgil committee, which talks about not developing recklessly and conserving thoughtlessly, something like that. So try to have certain differences and have one or two things which you can use alternately in the answer. So this was disaster management. There are 5 to 7 disasters that you can sort of have notes on or prepare accordingly and have a certain structure to it. In terms of, say, introduction, you can talk about, say, the Chamoli thing, flooding which happened here, or say the oil spill that happened somewhere else, whatever the question is. Or say I remember there was this question on urban floods which came in one of the test series questions. So one way in which you can talk about this is, say, talk about flooding across India and the difference here. So for example, if here it's happening, it's because of, say, over flooding of the Brahmaputra, right? When it happens in Bihar and the northeast, right? It happens because of this. When it happens in Chennai, it's because of something else. If it happens in, say, Mumbai, it's because of unplanned urbanization. If it happens here, it's usually because of glacial outbursts. So you can just talk about flooding here and use maps and diagrams to sort of show how different flooding is happening in different places. So disaster management, this was there. For security, again, if you're talking about solutions, talk about solutions that the government can take, talk about solutions that the armed forces can take, talk about solutions that the local people can take. So try to divide everything in terms of solutions, causes, and even within that, subheadings, right? So even anything that you're doing, legal steps, institutional steps, as we talked about in polity, here community-based steps, army-based steps, local-based steps, and examples of that. So in GS3, in the way forward and everything, I think you can use a lot of government schemes, government steps that have been taken. This is one space. Even in GS2, in the governance part as well, talk about government schemes, government steps, government committees which are there to make your answer better. So disaster management, security is done. Then environment. Environment may, again, apart from examples, and there are enough, you can use various sources for that as well. So say down to earth, if I was like really free and I didn't feel like studying anything, or I was getting too bogged down, I used to just like open down to earth videos, the magazine videos that you get, and any new example of something that has happened nicely in some part of the country, someone is doing good things for the environment, I used to just remember them and write them down and use them in the conclusion or in the main body of the answer. So examples is something that you can use in environment, even in terms of, say, something, so the Italian hydropower project and its influence. So based on whatever question is being answered, this time there was this question, say, on water crisis. So in terms of an introduction in environmental questions, it can either be an example of, say, a water crisis, say the Chennai water crisis, which has led to issues there, or you can talk about data, right? So data and examples are certain ways in which you can start it. Data, water crisis, say the Niti Aayog report about, you know, these many districts, 70% will be in water stress, this thing by 2022 or something like that. So remember these few data points is, say, for plastic, for water, for soil, for all of that. And in the last 7 days of your, before your mains, make sure that you're just going through all of this data, these examples, and use it in your answers, right? So water crisis or anything that was there, I think this time the question was about micro irrigation and water crisis, but anything which is there, you can talk about the issues in the introduction itself through an example or through in data to catch the attention. In terms of body, divide it in however way you can. So I haven't written the question here, but the question I think was about, in light of the current water crisis, how far do you think micro irrigation can benefit? So firstly, in terms of water crisis, you will just show after this thing that, you know, water crisis is something that is affecting. So this is not a main part of the question, the water crisis. It's saying in the light of the water crisis. So after an introduction about, say, the part of India which is under micro irrigation, I remember I did use this data. I don't remember the data right now, but the area of India which is currently under micro irrigation, which is very, very minuscule. You start with that introduction, you just talk about slightly about the water crisis कि अच्छा देखो नीति आयोग रिपोर्ट ने ये बोला है, इतनी जगह ये है, इतनी जगह वो है, या फिर वाटर क्राइसिस सॉइल मतलब फार्मर्स के लिए इतना है, लोगों के लिए इतना है, और इसका क्या और इम्पैक्ट हो सकता है. देन यू टॉक अबाउट द मेजर पार्ट ऑफ द क्वेश्चन in terms of can micro irrigation solve it. So micro irrigation you can start by what it is, just in terms of one line, and say 1, 2, 3, 4 ways mein it can help. Then you can also talk about, say, micro irrigation will help in this way. At the same time, it is not a silver bullet. It is not the only thing. So the next part of the question you can talk about other ways as well. And then in the conclusion, you can talk about, see, having a holistic approach, having this overall sort of thing will help us solve the water crisis. End mein you can talk about, say, the Mihir Shah committee, which especially talks about water and treating it as an entire system rather than having a piecemeal approach. So this is a way in which you can handle environment based questions using data, using examples, using committees which give suggestions, especially as the way forward. Okay, then we have economy. And economy, especially recently, it's become very tricky as to how to approach this, because sometimes random questions are answered. But make sure that whatever is at least mentioned in the syllabus, you have enough data points on that. Here also, you can begin with certain data that is being there. This time there was this question on, say, GDP was there. There were certain questions on, say, budget, and also those things I think you can't sort of predict. If those are there, you have to tackle them as they come. But if there are certain questions about, say, macroeconomic indicators or anything, start with data, anything you have about that fact. If it's about agriculture, say, so talk about, say, what is the amount of food grains that have been produced in the country, or the percentage of farmers in India, the percentage that is still dependent on, say, the secondary sector or the tertiary sector. So start with that. Again, you can also use, say, according to the economic survey, if something has been given. Whatever data you give, try to back it up. Otherwise also, if there's certain things that the economic survey is saying, the Niti Aayog agenda for 75 is saying, you can start economy questions with this. It can give a good introduction. Body, whatever is this thing, it will depend from question to question. But say there are certain things in the syllabus, say railways, say ports. Make sure that at least on these things, although the questions this time are more current based, whatever is coming in the news, but railways, ports, so have certain content on that ready. How much, what is the ratio of railways, say, freight and versus passenger. Similarly, say, committees in terms of way forward, so the Anil Kakodkar committee or the Bibek Debroy committee. These are things that you can work on in economy answers. And so if it's a question on export policy, right? So export policy, it was in the news recently. I remember this from one of the test series questions that I answered. So one thing that you can start with in terms of the government aim is to double it from, say, 2% to 4%, or the aim of you can start by saying that aim of $400 billion of exports in this year have been met, and this is something which is there, right? So these are things that you can follow for economy. For science and technology, I think I've more or less talked about already. I just like to say that last time I think there was this question about biotechnology in agriculture. A possible question can be on nanotechnology in other aspects, or in agriculture, or anything like that. Make sure that you have as many dimensions as possible when you're reading the newspaper. Say in the Hindu, I remember there's a specific page for science which comes. In Indian Express also sometimes there are certain things. Make sure that your eyes and ears are open for all of these examples. You don't need to read the entire thing, but even if there's just one line saying nanotechnology used in, say, making fabric of a certain kind, or artificial intelligence used by Google to do this, or say there was this collaboration between Uber and the Karnataka government regarding artificial intelligence about, say, road traffic. Just make sure that you write that down, jot that down, and next time when you write an answer, use it. So opening as many dimensions in science and tech questions, I think, is likely to fetch you good marks, and these are things that you can prepare beforehand. Lastly, we come to GS4. ठीक है, and GS4 में again there are two parts.